Hello everyone, and welcome to another Gear Talk. Today, as always, every other Thursday at 5 p.m., we are talking about Gears of War. So, what are we talking about today? Well, I have something I actually was waiting on. I decided to wait until a certain time to do it, and then I realized, well, I wanted to save it for the COG discussion series, but that's not going to be coming for a while. So I figured, hey, how about we just do it now, get it out of the way. I wanted to cover every single rank and the majority of all the characters, not all of them, there are a lot, but a majority of characters that fall into all of these places so we can see like the general military structure of the COG. I really wanted to touch on that, so I thought, well, now's better than later, why not? So I have right down here, and I have a lot of notes with a lot of characters. I'm going to be looking over here a lot because there's a lot. So I have every single rank from the Enlisted, so basically like the on the field ranks. We have the Warrant Officer ranks, which there aren't a lot, but we do have some. And then we also have the Officer ranks. So I have all three of those. We're going to go through each one, all the characters we fall in, and the entire military structure of the COG. A little quick, easy thing just to talk about, like, hey, you know, we play in the military with these guys all the time, the Army, the COG Army. Why not talk about what we've exactly been playing with, like where we stack up, like where Marcus is. We know he's a sergeant, but how high or how low does he fall compared to everybody else? I have also compiled everything. So everything I have is compiled in a way that states like, okay, here are all the ranks we have in the COG military, and I will tell you right now, there are some ranks that don't even exist in our world that I had to put in here. Very few, but some of the wording is different. So a lot of these things I had to take and like fuse with the COG military, with the ranking system of our own military in the real world. For me, America, so the US military. So I had to like combine feng shui a lot of things. Some of these don't even make sense. Like for instance, when we do get to lieutenant rankings, there are three. There is base lieutenant, just lieutenant, lieutenant second class, and then lieutenant first class. Like they're all three different. Instead of just lieutenant second class and first class, there are all three. So we're going to touch on everything best we can. I have the list of everything. Let's get into it. Starting off, we actually have something that doesn't fall into any of the three categories. We actually have academics, or the academy, or the cadets. The only one I have here for academy would be the cadets. We only ever have one character that's ever stated that they are a cadet that we ever come across and we ever see, and that would be Sophia Hendricks. Now, Sophia Hendricks is the only cadet that holds the title of cadet. She was over at the Halvo Bay Military Academy, and that's where she was basically thrown in to battle with Kilo Squad. Now, I had to look it up, and I did a lot of research on this, so fair warning, going through all of the ranks we are going to be talking about, I've had to put some things here or there or do a lot of research. Now, for the academic side of things, for the cadets, I had to look it up. Now, majority of all cadets that are ever gone through in our world military are never really thrown into any form of combat. Some are, very rare cases are they. Like there's some training that's on-field training that involves being actually out on the field. It looks like Sophia was probably one of these, especially since Halvo was being attacked. So she was placed with Kilo when they were sent out to do their mission. And that's Sophia Hendricks. She's the only cadet we ever get to know of. And that does it for like the sub-mini prelude class of the academic or academy classes. We now touch on to the main three classes for progression, so it's important to note that when it comes to the Enlisted and it comes over to the officer ranks, now yes, an officer has call and shots over the Enlisted ranks, but it's important to understand that like you have to go through different channels in order to go through those different ladders. So yes, officer rank outclasses the Enlisted rank, but you have to see it as kind of like the starting point is like a lieutenant for officers. So it's like a very like start off green as grass officer rank person could be like leading like a very grizzled sergeant that's been around for a few years. Like that's how it goes. So that's like the building blocks. It's not like after you finish off with all the sergeant classes, you can move up to lieutenant. If you go through officer training for that, you can do that, but you can't just move up there just like, oh, I got promoted and now I'm a lieutenant. It doesn't work that way, but we're going to cover it all in an ascending ladder that would look like that. Starting in the Enlisted ranks, we have the privates. So the privates are, you join the military, you go through the academies, or you go through boot camp and you're thrown in. This is the rank you are given. So the best example I could possibly give to show off a private in general would be Benjamin Carmine. Ben Carmine is a private First day out of the camps, there he is. He's ready to go. He is private class. I also have other characters like Anthony. Anthony, even though we meet him and he's probably been enlisted for a little bit of time, he was still private class when we met him, so he is also a private. Other characters we have here are like Dizzy Wallen. So with Dizzy, he was also private. He was brought in through the Lifeboat Initiative, and he basically stayed at private. Now, we learn later on with the Lifeboat Initiative, it's not like once you're thrown in with Lifeboat, that's just a bunch more privates. No, once you join the COG, you are still able to move up, as we'll see with another character coming, but you are never stuck at private. You can work your way through the ranks. It takes a lot of time, but you are able to actually do it. Next up, we actually have Dizzy's son, his stepson, which is Richie Wallen. Richie Wallen was his stepson, and he was also enlisted in the COG with the rank of private. Now, when he was enlisted, Dizzy was not enlisted yet, so it's not like they were both there at the same time. At the time Richie was enlisted, Dizzy was a civilian, so there's never been multiple Wallen men that have been enlisted at the same time. After that, we've got Augustus Cole. So out of the 4 members of Delta, Cole is the one that is the lowest ranked out of all 4. Now, there is a reason for this. He, with everything we've seen, with everything he does, he was offered many times promotions. Like countless, dozens and dozens of times offered to move up to corporal. He always turned it down because in Cole's eyes, how he saw it is that this is a war to fight the locust. Okay, rank really doesn't matter. I'm just here to kill locusts. I don't care about rank. So he always said no because he just didn't care about rank. He always focused on just going in, fighting the locust. That was always the goal. That was always what he wanted to do. He was there for morals. He was making everyone happy. He just stayed as he was. And honestly, I think that worked out best for him. It's not that Cole couldn't lead. We see in 3 he is able to lead somewhat well, but it's the fact that he knows where he is. His place is the morale. That's what he sees himself as, and that's what he chooses to stay as. The next one we have up is Garen Paddock. So Paddock, he was originally a major over with the UIR, but when they pulled him in and he joined the COG to fight against Karn, he was placed at the lowest position because he just joined the COG. So he was placed in at private rank. Now, it's important to note that with Paddock and Sophia, they never moved up in rank because of the fact that once they were done with Kilo, it was a few weeks later, they went AWOL. They completely left and they completely deserted the COG because Paddock was never really tried and true COG. He was kind of just there to fight Karn, and he was with Sophia, and he talked to Sophia a lot about how the UIR saw things, and she started to see like the errors and wrongfulness of the COG, so they both kind of just left and went AWOL. So that's why they never really ranked up since they were so early on into the war. They stayed where they were because they left. And I should state, too, for everything we're going to be looking at for the ranks, I'm going to take the final rank everybody had. I'm not going to take the highest they ever had or what they had going into what they had. We're going to take the final rank that they held before they either retired, the war ended, or they died. We're just going to go with that. Next up, we actually have 2 femme fatales joining in. We have Alicia Valera and Samantha Byrne. So with these 2, they both were also private rank. With Sam, she went to the end of the war and stayed private. It's never stated why she stayed private, and she was never promoted. She was always just a private. And then with Valera, she was a private, and unfortunately she passed because of Rom, so she didn't really get a chance to get promoted. After that, we also jump into Patrick Sultan. So with Patrick, he is a grizzled older gent. He's one of the greatest snipers that ever existed in the COG. He was around for the Pendulum Wars, Locust Wars. He made it to the end of the wars. As far as I believe, he made it to the end. I know he made it definitely to Anvil Gate. He was there. But the reason I can see that he was never really promoted, the best I can figure is that once the Locust War began, Patrick kind of just went off and did his own thing. He was still a part of the COG, but he was more of like a scout throughout the entire country. Like he would leave on long, month-long missions, and he wouldn't even come back to Afira or to Jacinto. He wouldn't come back for months and months on end. So the joke was, like, is he going to forget where Afira or Jacinto are? Does he even know? But he would always go out. So my assumption is that he was always gone for so long, so there was never really anything to promote him for. He was just gone, came back for like a few hours to a day, and then he just left again. So that's the best guess I can give to Patrick. He was just always out and about. He never stuck around to get promoted. That was my best guess with Patrick. When it comes to the next character we have Carlos Santiago. So Dom's older brother, he fought and he ended up dying over at Asheville Fields, or Asheville Fields, depending how you want to pronounce it. And he ended up dying at the rank of private. Now, I fully believe if he would have actually lived, he would have been promoted up to corporal. I think he would have been, because he was given an Embry star. He put his life on the line. If he would have lived and he would have been able to keep fighting, I think corporal. But as it goes, when he died, he did die as a private. The next two characters we actually have come over from Gears Tactics. We have Tyrone Shepard and Marcella Trin. So with these two, they were a part of Echo. They were found by Gabe, and for the short time that they were actually still enlisted, because Gabe's team ended up going AWOL and abandoning the COG. They were believed to be dead, and that's what they wanted, to get away from Prescott and to take out Ukon. Now, they were under private rank, and once they left, they all basically became essentially stranded, or at least the first outsiders, you could say. So they left. And when they left with the ranks of private for both of them, so they stayed private up until they left and went with Gabe. Or until they died, depending on how the story goes for you. Again, we're never really given a complete conclusion on how their stories end. We just know that they are actual characters in Tactics and that they did go with Gabe. They stayed private. We don't know what happens after. Next up, we actually have some multiplayer characters that were confirmed to be canon in the story. I'm just going to cover all four of them for us. We have the COG, Gears, and the Commandos, which their ranking system is basically the same, so we're going to throw them all together. So, I have Vermello, Kasan, Akagi, and Sanguino. All four of them were also in the COG fighting, and they all held private rank. We are never given confirmation if they ever moved up from that. They were always just under private. We are also going to continue putting in other characters here. Now, like I said, I'm not going to cover everybody, but I am going to throw in and give like an honorable mention at the end until we get to the higher ranks for like comic characters or for book characters that at least have their titles dropped for their ranking. So, again, I could go in detail for all these, but this is already going to be a long video. We're already past the 10-minute mark, and this is a lot. We're only in the private class right now. So some comic characters that we have that held the rank of private. We have Quinn, Gil Gonzalez, Hansen, Kinnear, and then two characters I actually really like that are given a little bit of some fleshed out story. We get Rufus and Takashi. They were a part of Midnight in the comics. I really did enjoy those two, even though like Rufus died within like, he was basically an unofficial Carmine. But they ended up in Midnight, and it was a good story. Read Midnight. It's amazing. And then the most honorable of honorable mentions I could possibly bestow was Private Tanner, who was basically Baird's jump mate in Gears of War 2 when they went down the grind lift. He's dead. You just see his dead body. That's just Tanner. Private Tanner's dead. And that'll cover everyone we have for Private, ending with Private Tanner. Thank you for your service, even though you didn't even make it into the Hollow. I'm sure you would have done great things, Tanner. But yeah, that takes care of everyone in the Private class. After working hard as a Private, you feel like it's time to move up, and even the officers think the same thing. You get promoted up to the Corporal rank. So Corporal is the rank right above a Private. Now, Corporal, basically, when it comes down to their responsibilities, they're basically just like the next one up from a Private, so they have experience and they have a rank higher than Private. Now, if it comes down to order of like a seniority or order of rank, the corporals are going to be in charge before the privates. That's basically how it's set up. Later on, we get more of a breakdown like who's really in charge as we go. Like we'll get sergeants, sergeant majors, and all of that. But for right now, corporals are basically just like the privates, except they're more seasoned and just hold a higher rank. And starting off the corporals, we actually have Dominic Santiago. Yes, Dom himself is a commando. He is also a corporal. So a commando corporal, but he also, you know, like I said, the ranks are basically back and forth, but he is corporal status. Now, he basically kept that ranking, and when it came to Marcus's trial, they definitely saw a place for him to go up to like sergeant and everything, but with Marcus's trial, he was still corporal level, and with everything he was voicing about Marcus and being in Marcus's corner, it was very highly unlikely they saw that he would ever get a higher rank or get promoted again. They saw him as basically he was going to be staying as corporal, which Dom's completely fine with. He never really cared that much about ranking or anything. He only really cared about his family, Maria, and getting originally a paycheck before the Locust came and he had to find Maria and fight off the Locust. But he never really cared about the rank, so him getting corporal, he was basically fine with. Next up, we have Baird. Now, we're going to touch on this a little bit. Again, we're not going to talk about this in the lieutenant side of things. We're just going to talk about it here for Baird. Now, originally, Baird was in the officer ranks as a lieutenant. Now, after the whole situation that happened at Halvo Bay, it came down to Loomis's decision of like, okay, here's the thing. I'm pardoning you. You are not going to be held for treason, and you are not going to be executed. but you are never going to see the rank higher than anything officer. You're never reaching officer rank again in your life. You're back down to enlisted, get in the front lines. I never want to see you again. That's basically how it went. So I originally thought that he was going to be permanent private and they were never going to give him anything else. I was wrong. So he is actually corporal status. So basically when it comes down to the order of things for Delta, at least, how they see it, since we have 1 private, 2 corporals, and a sergeant, we'll touch on Marcus soon, they always saw it as like who's going to be next in charge, and Cole always made it aware that it was never going to be Cole. He's the private. Next in the pecking order would be Baird. He has leadership experience, but also he's able to keep his head on a swivel, while Dom is like mentally and emotionally a little unsound at times. So Baird ended up getting brought down to private, made it up to corporal, and that's where he ended up when we first meet him. He is Corporal Damon Baird. And because I am mentioning major characters and I do have to at least talk about her, Kate Diaz is a corporal level. So when it came to the military and everything that happened in the new COG, and by the way, we're going to touch on this as we get further in with the old COG and new COG, how their rankings work. It's a little different, mostly the same. Basically how it works is that she came into the COG, she accepted to join, and she went from private, she made it up to corporal. Now, we aren't going to say see JD or Dell for a while because they went through a lot of other trainings to be higher ranks. So right now we see Kate as a corporal, and I don't really want to cover anything else. I just don't like Kate. So next up, let's talk about Michael Barrick, one of my favorite characters. So Michael Barrick is also a part of the Lifeboat Initiative. So when he came in basically because he was looking for some fun to kill some grubs. He made it through private and he made it up to corporal status. So again, with the Lifeboat Initiative, just because you joined in and everyone saw you as former stranded doesn't mean you can't move up the ranks. Again, Barrick moved up the ranks to corporal. He is not a private anymore. He is Corporal Michael Barrick. So you can actually move up, and that's where we get Barrick. So going from that also, since we're talking about Zeta, let's talk about Ty. Ty is also a corporal. So Ty Caliso is also a corporal. He fought in the Pendulum Wars, then he fought into the Locust Wars, and we fought up until Gears War 2. I honestly expected him to be higher, like a sergeant, but no. He is a corporal, so I'm assuming that he had the same mind frame as Cole, except more extreme. I just want to kill the Locust. I'm assuming that's what it was. Again, because he was always there in like a bunch of situations fighting. Now, maybe Zeta Squad had it where like he wasn't looked as like they give him a promotion or anything, because again, Kim kind of went against orders in the whole Zeta Squad situation over in Alima. So maybe, you know, and again, like the other squads, they were given an out if they wanted, of course, by Kim. But they chose not to. So I'm assuming they just looked at the whole squad and said, you know what, this is a wash. No one gets anything. Nope, y'all are just going to stay ranked. Just get out of here. Get out. I'm assuming that's probably what happened. Next up, we have Lizzie Carmine, or Elizabeth Carmine, Lizzie for short. Lizzie was also corporal rank. So she was also over at the Settlement 2 battle that was happening in Gears 5, and she was kicking ass and taking names. She was very close with Clay. We're going to be getting to Clay further up we go. Yes, Clay is higher than a private at this point. We'll talk about his rank when we get there. But yeah, Lizzie was doing a great job. Unfortunately, she ended up dying because of the hammer strikes. I have no doubt she probably would have followed in her uncle's footsteps. She probably could have made a pretty high sergeant rank. But no, she ended up dying, and we end up having Lizzie stuck at corporal until the end of her days, which just so happened at Settlement 2. Next character up, we have Jace Stratton. So, Jace is a corporal. So that is how he went through his entire career. He stayed corporal rank. I know in the very beginning of the comics and everything, when he's first brought in, we do have Private Jace, but as we go, he does become a corporal, and he is a part of all the squads as Corporal Jason Stratton, or Jace Stratton. He ends up retiring, so he doesn't actually die, or he doesn't end up, you know, like anything happen, like he leaves after the war. Like, he retires. So when he retires, he stays corporal, and he just says, good, I'm fine, I'm gonna go make movies now, see y'all later. Yeah, very cut and dry. Just became a corporal, finished the war, and said, okay, I'm retiring. So yeah, Jace Stratton. Up next, we got Jeremiah Keegan. So Jeremiah Keegan, he held corporal rank, but he held it through the Onyx Guard. Now, we're going to talk about the Onyx Guard a little bit right now because we have him, and then we have Rivera and Lowe we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the Onyx Guard build of everything for their ranking system. So I'm just going to break this down a little bit because I could make a whole video talking about the difference between Onyx and COG. We're just going to talk about the ranking system here. So their ranking system is completely the same. Their ranking is the same, but they are two different branches of the COG. You have the COG military, the COG, the military itself, the army, and then you have the Onyx Guard. So they are two separate branches. They do not listen to one another, although it does always turn out normally the COG is listening to the Onyx Guard. Now, here's the thing. The army listens to the leader of the army, the general at that time that is leading the army of the COG. That is who we get. For instance, let's give an example of Solomon. Solomon, we're going to talk about later on. Let's say he's leading the COG. Well, when it comes to the Onyx Guard, they are the government branch. They listen to the government side. They are listening to Prescott. Prescott is giving them the orders on what they have to do. So, for instance, in Halvo Bay, Baird is a lieutenant, but when an Onyx Guard gives him an order, they listen to the Onyx Guard. The Onyx Guard, it's not even like they have to outrank you to give you orders, but it's more like the Onyx Guard is doing their own thing. They're the elites. That would be like, okay, here's a normal soldier, and here's like a Green Beret or something like that, or a SEAL from SEAL Team 6. I don't know. Like, you're talking about two different factions here that are under the same, like, country. The Onyx have a lot of sway compared to the military. Even their lower ranking, like, members can call some shots with some of the COG, as we've seen before. For instance, when it comes to, like, Dury, who is basically like a very higher standing member of the Onyx Guard, he can do a lot of stuff involving the COD and bark in order, and they're going to listen. Not because they are forced to listen to Onyx, but because it's basically like, no, I'm Onyx Guard, you're going to listen to me, come on. That's basically how the rundown is. So even though we have characters like Jeremiah who holds corporal status, he's calling a lot of shots compared to characters that are higher ranked. For instance, and we'll get into it, Lonnie comes up later on as a higher rank than him. He is the leader of Scorpio, and Lonnie sits there as the second in command. Not even by a ranking system, but it's because he's Onyx Guard. I mean, what are you really going to say? So that's basically how it works. Onyx Guard kind of just always takes precedence over the COG. That's just how they view it. So Keegan, he was originally a quartermaster in the army, and then he went on over and he got inscripted into the Onyx Guard. He made his way up to corporal. He was sent off to Azura. He survives, and he's still alive today. Technically, he is not a part of the functioning COG military. He's a part of like a splinter group off the books, but technically he retired with corporal. He's pseudo kind of still fighting, but he's not fighting with a rank. He is just Jeremiah Keegan. But if we were to say yes, the position that he would hold at the moment would be a corporal if he were to come back and be officially recognized by COG forces. Rivera and Lowe are up next. So they are also both Onyx Guard. They were originally COG. They also got inscripted and brought in, and they, well, not they. We're going to say this, here's how we're going to look at it. Rivera was officially confirmed to have corporal status. That is Rivera. So, we were never given an official ranking for Lowe, but because of the fact they are both watching over Prescott, they are both brought into Onyx, and they both come back with Prescott, I am one to assume, we are never given anything official, but I am going to assume Lowe is also a corporal. I don't see a reason that they would be holding equal footing watching Prescott if one was ranked higher than the other. It's just always put up as like, these are his two guards. I'm assuming they're both going to be corporal. We know for a fact Rivera is. Lowe, put an asterisk next to corporal. I'm willing to put corporal there. Alrighty, and then some honorable mentions from the comics and the book. So, coming up for the comics, we have Amon, Collins, and Maxon. They were all three corporals when we meet them, and they are all three corporals in the stories. And finally from the books, and we're going to just throw in the names of the book people just so like you have an understanding of characters that like held the titles in the books if you were to ever read the books. Again, we're not going over everyone, but I'm just going to give you examples. Some of these ranks coming up, we only get either things from collectibles or books, so we are going to touch on these a little bit. We get Tebbit. Now, Tebbit is in the books. They are in the slab. That's basically what I'm going to say. Read the books. They're great books. I'm just going to name drop them so you know that there were characters in the books that also held rank. So Tebbit held the book status. If your higher ranking officials see you as someone who is able to at least have an understanding of leading or organizing a team and have an idea that like, okay, this person isn't ready to jump into a full team lead itself, but they are able to actually sit there and like organize everything, you might be placed as a specialist. Now, a specialist is a very special role because you have the abilities of like a corporal, just not all the responsibility. Basically, a specialist is the kind of person who's able to like organize the team and get everything together. Like they're the ones that are just like, okay, roll call, everybody, let's get in here and take a look. Let's see what we got. While the corporals are the one that's kind of like, hey, I do outrank and I am the one that has to fall on leadership position if something were to happen to our sergeant. That's basically how it's seen. The specialist position, there's not really a lot. Even in actual military, there's not a lot of specialists compared to the other ranks. For instance, right here, we only have them from Onyx Guard members who are over at Halvo Bay as collectibles. We have S. Katile. We're going to go Katile. And then we have S. Dasher. So Katile and Dasher, those are the ones we have that are over in Halvo Bay. They end up dying, and you collect their collectibles, but they were under specialist status. Once it is seen that you are able to lead a squad, you are able to take the orders and give the orders, they may move you up to the sergeant position. Now, we have multiple different sergeant positions, but we're just going to cover what we are given in the actual lore of Gears of War. There's a bunch in the actual military, but we are going by what we are given here. So, starting off, we just have sergeant. Sergeant by itself, basically they see it as you're able to lead a 4-man squad. They see it as you're able to lead people, you and 3 others, you can go in. Like Delta Squad. This is where, speaking of which, we have Marcus. So Marcus is holding the sergeant rank. He always holds it. He never really gives it up, or he never gets promoted or loses it. The only time he does lose it is when he goes to the slab and he is rescued by Dom and they bring him back. Once they bring him back, he is private. They bring him back, they reset him all together, and he goes through and follows Kim. When everything happens with Rom and Kim is gone, begrudgingly you can hear it. Basically, Hoffman gives him an informal promotion of like, Sergeant Phoenix, you're in charge now. Because of the fact that he was already sergeant, he has the most leadership out of everyone there. So they basically were just like, give it to Marcus. Just give it. You're sergeant again. You're just a sergeant. There you go. You're sergeant. An impromptu promotion back to sergeant. So Marcus holds sergeant. We know Marcus well. Leader of Delta. Always has been. Always will. Aside from Kim the first time, but his job was to take over. Next up, we have Alex Brand. So Alex and Marcus both hold the position of sergeant, and it's really fun to see when you first see it in the comics, because in the story, you don't get it a lot. In the actual game itself, you don't see it a lot where 2 sergeants are working together, because how you see it in the story, at least, and how they paint it, is that a sergeant's leading their own squad, and they're doing their own thing. They never really come together that often. So it was really interesting to see Marcus with Alex, 2 sergeants that are leading an operation. It was really fun to see. I like Alex. I think she's great. Alex was, in my mind, a really well-done character when she was introduced in Baron. I thought it went really well. It shows her character, and even after everything she went through without being able to have children, being barren, going through the birthing farms, she still joined the COG and was able to make it all the way to sergeant. I thought that was really cool. Another female character we have that is sergeant is Bernadette Mataki, or Bernie. Bernie is also sergeant status. She held that all the way back in the Pendulum Wars. She just never let it go. She went into retirement and then tried to return, but it took her a long time to come back. When she finally made it back, they just pulled her rank from retirement and said, okay, you're sergeant again, Bernie. There you go. Sergeant Bernie Mataki. I did really nice and easy wrap up. They just said, here, it's just yours again. I loved it. That's Bernie. We have Gabriel Diaz, or Gabe Diaz. This is the rank he had before he ended up leaving the COG. So originally he had a higher rank when he was working the more covert operations for Prescott and the government and everything. He had a higher rank. I believe he was in the lieutenant. No, he was higher than lieutenant. He was a lot higher than lieutenant. But he held a higher rank. And when he openly said he wanted to go to motor pool and he was done with all that, he took the sergeant position, and that's basically where he wanted to stay. So he had his own little squad, and he just stayed in the motor pool. That's all he wanted. Next up, we actually have Oscar. So when Oscar was enlisted in the COG before he left, he was a sergeant. So he held sergeant status. Him and Gabe were both very well in the COG with how they worked and functioned and their work ethic. They were very good. Oscar, he just chose to stay with the COG, and he made it up to sergeant rank, and that's where he stayed until he chose to leave. Nothing really crazy to say there. He just made it up to sergeant status, and it's Oscar. So, later on he became a bit of a drunk, and, he tried to fix himself. He worked on it, but he died as an outsider. He retired. Well, he went AWOL technically from the COG, I believe. So he went AWOL under the sergeant status. Next up after him, we have Jonathan Harper. So Jonathan Harper is someone we get a lot of in the comics. John is basically like the guy who's going around, and he's like the background main character that's kind of fighting his own thing with Rustlung. You get in little collectibles, and in the comics he gets his own comic. I enjoyed it a lot. He ended up dying in the Hollows. He made it right out of the Hollows, and he died. He died with the sergeant rank. He did lead his own squad, but a lot of times he was also a part of squad. So I believe before he hit sergeant, or maybe he was a sergeant at that time, he was a part of, well, he was going to be. He never was, but the idea was that he was going to be joining up with Zeta Squad, but that was changed around and you got Kim instead. But originally John was going to be the character they were going to put in there. But, sergeant ranking, it would have worked, but I think Kim is still a good choice. Anyway, Sergeant Jonathan Harper. Next up, we actually have William Carmine. So, William Carmine, another Carmine we have, was also sergeant rank. When he retired, technically he retired with sergeant rank, I believe, or he was about to retire, and then E-Day occurred, and he died like 10 minutes into ROM. But originally he was retiring, he was done, he went through all of the Pendulum Wars. I think he went like 20 to 30 years. He fought in the Pendulum Wars and he was finally retiring. He made it all the way up to Sergeant and he was like, yep, I'm done. I'm all finished up. So one of the only times, at least close to, you get a retirement with someone who's a higher rank. That doesn't really happen a lot with the characters, which we'll talk about when we get there. Let's just say the Locust had an idea on how to deal with the higher ranking individuals. He was pretty close with Sergeant. He was at least looking to finally put his boots up. Next up, we'll cover some comic characters just to round out everything we have and go into a few characters from the books. So, some characters we're going to cover, just some I'll go into detail a little bit before I just rattle them off. We have tacked and Cho Liang. So with these two, they were part of the Pesang. They were basically like the Black Ops, like they worked with the COG. They were never officially COG, but they held COG ranking. You need to remember that. They held COG ranking, but they weren't official members because they were basically just like a nation assisting. That's how it was. So they're like the Black Ops went in and like when everything was quiet and like took out the enemy in like the dead of night, just pew pew. I don't know if that's the best way I can do Black Ops, like silent killing, but that's what they did, and they did a lot of stuff with Colonel Hoffman. So they all fought with him, and they reached that ranking. Unfortunately, I don't remember what happened to Cho Liang exactly, but I know that tacked did end up dying. He drowned when they were doing Operation Leveler, so unfortunately, we did lose a great man. But we did get the hammer plans. That's at least what really matters. Then we also have like Drew Rossi and Daniel Kennan, which are some very well fleshed out characters in the comics. You at least get a little bit of them. Well fleshed out ain't the best part. You get a little bit of them is better what I should say. Rossi you get a lot of. Kennan, not so much. Finally, you get Hudson Connors and Gunnar Pedersen. These two were actually characters that were brought up in like some extra bonus material, but they are canon characters. For instance, Hudson, he was a Landdown hero. He was well known in Landdown for, you know, being a part of the war and everything. Now, this was not during Gears 2. This was before. This is just information he was talking about before the events of Gears of War 2. And then Gunnar, he actually died during the Light Mass Offensive, but we at least have him here. He was a sergeant ranking. And then finally from the books, we have Samuel Byrne, which is Samantha's father. He died over in Anvil Gate. He held sergeant. And then we have Eardell, which I don't really have much info on Eardell except that they were known as Iron Balls Eardell. The Sergeant Iron Balls, they'd call him. So those are your sergeants. Coming up to this part, okay, we had to do a bit of a... This is where things get a little bit wonky because at this point you have characters that hold titles that are essentially the same type of rank but different titles. So I had to take the COG building blocks of their rank system, take the United States Army building system for their ranks, and I mushed them together to make this as effective as I could. Okay? So starting off, we have Chief Sergeant. So with a Chief Sergeant, if they really see that you're like a sergeant among sergeants, they're going to move you on up. If they see you as someone training the next generation in general, that's what you're going to be. They can lead up to squads of 8 to 16 soldiers, so multiple squads they're able to lead. They have control over multiple. And characters we have here, in fact, would be Clay Carmine. So Clay actually stayed with the COG during the Locust War. Even the intermission period where like they were getting the new COG set up, he stayed. He decided to stay with the COG and keep fighting. They brought him in, he continued his fight, and they moved him up to a Chief Sergeant. So Chief Sergeant, again, he's like, how they see Clay at least with a Chief Sergeant status, he's training the next generation, like Lizzie, JD, Dell. He's like their trainer. He's like the chief of the sergeants. That's who he is. So he's the one that's kind of like helping out with it all, and that's the ranking we at least get for Clay. Okay. Going from Chief Sergeant, we have Sergeant Major. Now, I had to compare and contrast to see what would be higher, and as far as I could tell, Sergeant Major is higher. The only character that holds the Sergeant Major position is Graham J. He is from the books, and it is openly stated that he is dead. He is buried at the Tomb of the Unknowns, and this is like someone that Prescott's just talking to when he's trying to figure things out involving like a situation. I believe it was after Operation Leveler, I believe, and he's just talking basically to the tombstone or at least the plaque of Graham because he's just trying to word and vent things out. So that's the only position we have for Sergeant Major. As far as I can tell, comparing everything and reading up on everything for position-wise, it would go Sergeant Major going over Chief Sergeant. That's what I was able to confer from this. We now leave the enlisted position. So we make it all the way up through all those sergeants. And there are other sergeant positions in like the United States military, which I'm basing all this off of for the Army. But the thing is that I'm going by also what's stated in the COG. Now, since we don't need anything else, like we don't really like staff sergeants or anything, I'm not going to put those in here. Because we don't know if those are actual COG positions. This is a fictitious military we're talking about. But we do have the next class, which is the Warrant Officer ranks. With the Warrant Officer ranks, these are kind of looked at people who have like specialties and certain categories or strategists or things like that. So for instance, the first thing we have here in the Warrant Officer ranks that we have that falls into everything, we have the Gunner position. So with the Gunner position, we have 4 characters that are openly stated to be Gunner, and I had to look this up to make sure Gunner fell into Warrant class. It does fall into the Warrant Officer units classes. So the Gunner position is held by Sasha Dufour, Arlen Pereira, Bethan Pohl, Peyton Tovey. These 4 hold the Gunner position. Now, basically, they're trained in artillery. That is what they are trained in, the heavy cannons. That is their main teachings. They all 4, I believe, died at Anvil Gate when it was the Siege of Anvil Gate originally, when Hoffman was also first getting his name out there for the hero of Anvil Gate. All 4 of them end up dying there, but yeah, we get positions of 4 gunners that are listed, and that makes the Gunner rank in the Warrant Officer class to start us off. Going to the actual Warrant Officer class. So it is stated we have Warrant Officer 1, which is the official title of this class. We only get 1 character, and that is G. Valera, who is an Onyx Guard member, not to be mistaken with Alicia Valera, though this may be a relative. We do have the name, so it might be a relation we don't know. But as far as we can see, they ended up dying at Halvo Bay also. They were part of the Onyx Guard. Now, it is important to state this is the only thing we get for Warrant Officers when it comes to the actual title of a Warrant Officer. It is Warrant Officer 1 is her official term for her rank. So, like I saw with the other rankings in the actual army that exists, we also have Chief Warrant Officers 2 through 5. Now, since we don't have any of those named, I'm going to say we have never seen them before, but since we have a Warrant Officer 1, I'm assuming the other officer classes must exist, since she does have Warrant Officer 1. She has the actual 1 in her title. So those are all your warrant officers. We now make our way into the officer ranks. So the officer ranks are really fun, actually, because these are the ones who are actually like in leadership positions in the COG, or at least for squads, and then going into leadership. So starting off, let's say you go through your officer training, you get everything done, and you are now moved up into the officer ranks. You will start off as a lieutenant. Again, this is something I had to take liberty with because of the fact that they do have 3 different types of lieutenants instead of just 2. They have lieutenant, second lieutenant, and first lieutenant. They do not just have second and first lieutenants, they also have the base lieutenant status. Now, the reason I bring this up is because of the fact that the old COG and the new COG, they had different rankings when it comes to the officer ranks. For instance, first and second classes are looked a lot more specifically for the ranking than in the original COG, but in the original COG, they do have first lieutenants and second lieutenants. So I had to kind of just meld everything in with lieutenant, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, because of the fact that some people are given in the original COG lieutenant status, second lieutenant, first lieutenant. So I am assuming with the COG structure there are 3 forms of lieutenant. Let's cover them all and take a look. Lieutenant status. So, you go through your training, you're thrown in as a lieutenant, you have the possibility of leading platoons. This is 16 to 44 soldiers you're able to actually lead. Some of these characters we have, for instance, probably the one we know well enough is probably going to be Kim. So, Min Young Kim, he was like the lieutenant we knew of the best out of everybody. So, we meet him in the first Gears of War, decent enough fellow by the book, kind of an a-hole at times, but I mean, it's Kim. It's very interesting for Kim because he started off as a lower rank originally when E-Day first occurred. I believe he was a corporal. And then after that, he went through all of his training and everything. He became a lieutenant. So when he was a lieutenant, he went through and did the Alima mission. So when he did that, he went against orders basically because he was told to retreat. They did not. And he was given a quote-unquote demotion. Now, his rank was never demoted, but his responsibilities were. So instead of a lieutenant leading like a large group, like again, 16 to 44 soldiers, he's basically doing like the mission to go find the resonator with Delta. That's what he's given. So he kind of was never really a big fan of that because he's a lieutenant, but he's leading like a sergeant. So, you know, in name-wise, he was always a lieutenant, but he always held that lower status in the eyes of people that were in charge. So that's Kim. Nothing really crazy to say about it, just it's Kim. He died with the position, so good on you, mate. Next up, we actually have Lonnie Caliso, so Ty's cousin and another member of Scorpio. She holds lieutenant ranking. So She's a part of like the newer COG. So she was originally part of like the old COG when they first started this. When they first started the new COG, but it was still old COG rules, and she was lieutenant. And they've brought back the Brash Brigade, who she's a part of, and the new COG, but she's, again, off the books just like Keegan, so we don't know if she would have first or second lieutenant or just lieutenant again. But she does hold lieutenant, and she went through with the Brash Brigade and fought with them, and that's how she got up to her lieutenant status, was going through and fighting with the Brash Brigade. Nothing crazy, just she's a lieutenant. Again, she is second in command of Scorpio, so even though she is a lieutenant status, we have Keegan in charge as a corporal, but he is Onyx Guard status. Again, that's just something you have to look at when it comes to, like, you know, Onyx Guard, where do they fall in commanding who? You know, that's just what you got to look at. Next up, actually, we have Draper. So Draper is really fun. Good old eye patch and everything. The leader of Midnight. He was leading a pretty decent size amount of soldiers, so that's a good way to show like a platoon. He wasn't just leading 3 people. He had other people with him. Like, for instance, we've mentioned Takashi, Rufus, Amon. You had Gil was a part of that at that point. You also had Jace, so that's already just 5 off the bat right there, counting him 6. So that's 6 just right there. He's leading more than just 3 other people. So that's what you get with like lieutenant. You get the ability to lead more. And Draper's just really fun. We never know what happens to him if he ever died or not, but we know at least at the time we last see him, he holds lieutenant ranking. A special mention, because this isn't in the books or the comics, this is in the collector's material for the Helvo Bay Survivor log for Kilo. We have Ozaba. Ozaba was the original leader of Kilo. He was a lieutenant, and he died right before the events of Judgment, so that's where Baird had to step in, since Baird at the time was also a lieutenant. So Ozaba died, and throw in Baird. He's good to go. And then we just have the honorable mentions, like with comics and the books, just to give you an understanding of characters that were also lieutenant ranking. We have Preston and De Silva. They were both from the comics. And then from the books, we have Satcher, Meredith, and Mansell. Those 3 were also from the books. They come up now and then, and they are the lieutenant status. So they are also officer ranks. You just moved on up. You've done a great job as a lieutenant. They're moving you up as a second lieutenant. In this class, you're also going to be met with Delmont Walker. So Del, we know Del pretty well. He's our great friend that joins us in 4 and 5. He's basically the comedy relief and Jack's best friend. Yes, by the time of 5, he is holding the position of second lieutenant. So he has gone up at least 1 rank. He's done a pretty good job. Yeah, nothing really crazy to say, just the next level of lieutenant, at least in the COG structure of things, we have Del. Now, he does end up, we don't know the exact ending. Spoilers ahead, even though it's been years. We don't know the exact ending of 5. We don't know the canonical ending, but we do know for a fact someone dies. We don't know if it's Del or if it's JD. I'm assuming Del, so I'm going to say here, unofficially, he dies with the rank of second lieutenant. Also here we have another Onyx Guard member. We have R. Wood. So Wood actually ends up, their dog tags are over at Helvo Bay. They were also the ranking of a second lieutenant. That's what I mean by, like, with the old COG, they had lieutenants, but they also did use second and first, because we have Wood here, who is Onyx Guard, or maybe the Onyx Guard just used it. I don't know. It could be any or. But we do know that Wood ended up dying with the status of a second lieutenant. You just made your way up another rank. Are you going to move up to the captain class yet? No, you're still a lieutenant at first lieutenant, but this is the final lieutenant class. Up here, we actually have Faz Chutani. So, Faz is here. Now, he holds the first, it's pretty funny, actually, if you look at the building of, like, all the main characters we have. Aside from Kate, all of them hold a pretty high position in the main grand structure of everything. But you have Faz here holding first lieutenant, so you have Del holding second, Faz holding first, and you'll never guess who's captain rank. But yes, you have Faz here. He moved his way up here. He is also a by-the-book COD member. He gets along at the very end of 5 with everyone else a little bit more, but he is very by-the-book, and he's very like, the COG. I believe in the COG. Screw you guys, it's the COG. Kind of in a sense, a lot like Kim, except not as, he's more brash about it. So, Faz, as far as we know, he is still alive right now, and he holds the first lieutenant ranking. Also, characters that hold it here, we have a lot of Onyx Guard that held first lieutenant. We have T. Loomis, not to be mistaken with Ezra Loomis. We're going to get to him. We have T. Carlson and B. Clarkson. All three of these also held the first lieutenant ranking in the COG order structure when it came to the Onyx Guard side of things. Coming up, we have captain ranking. So captain is really fun because now captain, you get to lead a bunch more soldiers. You have a company under you now. You're able to lead a company, which is around 60 to 200 soldiers, is about the size of a company I have here. Starting off here, we have James Dominic Phoenix, or JD, or just James. So JD, we'll just call him for now. So he holds this position. After everything that happened at Settlement 2, he really went quiet, went through like a mini depression, and he focused only on the COG and working, and he moved all the way up to a captain position, which is, honestly, looking at everything here, getting through the lieutenant positions takes some time. He made it to captain, good on ya. So he holds captain position, so he's able to lead if he wants, and we do see throughout the story, at least, like, especially in the beginning when they go over to Oscar's village, it does seem like he is holding a bit more of an air to him when it comes to at least ranking with the COG around him. So he does hold a higher position. Like, you see a captain and you're a lieutenant, you're like, yeah, this guy's already gone through, in the COG, the 3 steps just to get through lieutenant. So we have JD right here. Also, we have Paul Dury. He is the Onyx Guard member who is the Onyx Commander. So at the time of around 1 AE, or at least the beginning of the Locust War, he was under the captain level for the rankings. I make it sound like you level up with everything, but it kind of is if you think about it. So he holds that position, and he is in charge of the Onyx Guard. Like I said, the Onyx Guard is done by the government side of things, but they still need someone to regulate the soldiers so that Prescott's not doing it 24/7. That comes down to Paul Dury. Around the time that like 1 AE occurs, that's when they get him off, and they get him over to like Azura with everyone else, even sooner than 1 AE. Like, the Onyx Guard left relatively early on in the war. Like, even before like you had some of the higher ranking COG positions taken, the Onyx Guard were swept away. So later on, everyone thought like they were just like, not even an urban myth, but like just legend of like the Onyx Guard, and like, oh, and when the Academy went, we never saw much of them anymore. Truth be told, the majority, not all, but the majority were taken off, and they were placed over at Azura in order to kind of like defend the island, the last bastion of like the humans, like throughout all of Sarah, basically, is what they thought was going to happen. So yeah, Paul was in charge of that, and he did survive, and he is, as far as we're aware right now, still alive currently in the story. He is retired, I would say, at the captain level. Up next, we have David Jones. So David Jones is interesting because we get a name for him, and we actually get some voice lines and everything in the game. He is the Onyx Guard member that held captain status that was constantly going in to the, basically the trial that Loomis was holding, and just like, sir, can we go? Are you done? Is this really the best time? Can we just leave? They are at our door right now trying to kill us. That was Jones. He was constantly like, sir, can we just leave, please? We're going to die here. Can we just go? I always got a kick out of that character. I loved it. So yeah, that was Jones. Like, he was captain status. Next up, we also have Randall Sander. So, I would just say from the books, but I'm going to mention it very quickly because he plays a little bit of a role in Hoffman's story. So, Randall was originally the captain in charge of Anvil Gate. He was the one in charge. He loved painting. I'll say that. So he was in charge, and when he died, he got hit with a shell that flew right through all the windows and blew him into pieces. His death is the reason that Hoffman was placed in charge of Anvil Gate, and that Hoffman was now the one leading all of it, and that's how he became the hero of Anvil Gate, was because of the fact that Sander ended up dying here. So Sander dies, and that's how Hoffman ascends basically to his legend. Now, going up the ranks from here, we're going to be hitting Major. Now, a lot of these characters, I actually have descriptions on them so you understand like where they're from and everything, because now we're dealing with the heavy hitters. Like, once you hit Major, you're dealing with characters that are more well-known, and, like, these are the characters that are, like, pseudo-leading portions of the COG, or, like, end up getting higher positions when they leave. For instance, we have Anya Stroud. Anya held a lower rank throughout the entire Locust War, but once the Locust War was over and they decided to start the new COG, she was basically given a unanimous promotion to Major status. So Anya was given a promotion to Major, and she held Major until she ended up retiring and becoming the new, so not a chairman. How the new COG does it is basically they call them first ministers. So she became the minister. So she became First Minister Stroud of the new COG. But originally, before she did that, she was promoted to Major. Then she became minister. So you have Anya, and also we have Helena Stroud, her mother. They both held, at the end of either their lives, well, yeah, their lives technically, they're both passed, unfortunately. By the end of their lives, both of them ended up holding Major status. Helena held it all the way up until the Ashfield Field situation when she got blown up by a grenade. So, unfortunately, Helena did not make it too far to see the greatness that her daughter would instill among the people after the war was over, but they both ended up making it to Major. It's crazy, because both Stroud women, Major status, which is a very, very high rank to hold amongst the COG, especially at the time of the end of the Locust War. Not many Majors were around, period. Also, we have Adam Phoenix. Now, when he was done, now obviously Adam works on weapons, he's a scientist, he was a part of the COG. When he was a part of the COG, he was in the officer ranks, and he did work his way up to Major. So he was a Major before his retirement. He didn't die a Major, he died a scientist, but he was a Major when he retired from the COG and went into weapons development, making weapons of mass destruction. So Adam was a Major during his retirement. Another character we have, they didn't retire, they actually went AWOL, was Sid Redburn. Sid also held Major status in tactics. Remember, Major Redburn. Like, crazy to think about. When you look at him, you wouldn't think Major. But yes, he was a Major. He was all the way up in that status in the officer rankings, and he ends up leaving when the COG believes that he's dead. He leaves along with Gabe and their crew, and he goes AWOL, so he was originally Major status before he left. And he became, again, stranded or one of the first outsiders. After that, Donald Matheson. So, after the events of the original Locust War and we get further on to Hivebusters, we do learn that Matheson stayed along with the COG and he made it up to the Major status. So, if you didn't remember, he lost both of his legs when he was originally on the field. I believe he was a lieutenant originally when he was in the slab. He lost his legs and he had to retire to working comms. Now, he still held his rank, but he was in comms. He finally was able to get prosthetics that worked and he moved up the officer ranks to Major. And he is in the background, pseudo, like, a shadow assisting Team Scorpio. That's really what Matheson's up to nowadays. He is still a part of the COG as of today. We just don't know exactly what he's doing aside from in the background helping out the Hivebusters. Next up, we have a comic character named Baxter. Now, Baxter was in the comics. Nothing really to go on, just an example of, oh, here's a Major in the comics. The big thing I really want to talk about, though, are the next two characters we have. They are given, like, almost no story. We just know that, like, they're going to be next up in line if Hoffman were to have died during the Locust War. We have McClintock and Alexander Reed. So with these two, now like I said earlier, there weren't a lot of Majors at the time. When it came to the officer ranks, there were not a lot of officer ranks, period, during the time of like the end of the Locust War, because the Locusts, like Rom made it a point of, were going through and cutting off the heads of snakes. If they came to squads, they were killing sergeants. If they came to major leadership, they were killing lieutenants, majors. We have later on, we get brigade, like Colonel Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel, like all these other ones, Brigadier, like they were trying to kill the high-standing members in order to just lose all form of direction in the COG. So we did not have a lot of major players anymore. So it was decided at this time there were only some majors that were still around. If Hoffman were to bite the dust and they got a hold of him, one of these two would be the ones that would be taking over. As we can see though, that didn't happen. Hoffman lived. Yay for Hoffman. But these were the backup plans right here. The next position we have, let's say you're a major and you're doing so good, they think like, you know what, this guy's able to start leading, bop him up again to another promotion. We're giving him commander. So with a commander, this one, again, I had to feng shui into here because this isn't like a normal building structure when it comes to an army. After Major, though, we have Commander. And with Commander, we started with Miriam Trescu. So Trescu was technically a part of the COG at one point, the very ending of it before they dissolved it. Trescu was a part of the COG, and his job was basically like, honestly, his job was just to lead his people, just to lead the Grozny. He really didn't have any other military roles aside from you're going to lead them. Now, normally a commander holds a higher position and they're doing a lot more things involving like planning and structuring of what's going to be happening. Like they're the ones out with the map and they're looking over things like, here's our plan of attack, gents. That's basically something a commander would do. But by the end of the war, he was a commander over in the UIR. They let him keep commander status and they just told him, just lead your people and we're all going to work together here. So that's basically what he was doing. Nothing too fancy. When the COG did dissolve, he ended up still having the rank of commander, and then he just went back to leading the UIR and he was just commander. So he just kept commander the whole time, just went to a different army with it. He went back and forth. UIR, COG, UIR. He just kept commander. He's Commander Trescu. We just give him that. We also have Walker. So Walker was also commander status. Walker was the person that was on comms with Zeta Squad when they were going through Alima. So that was Walker. She was all the way up in commander. I did not know she ranked that high. But yes, Walker did hold commander status. We don't know her status as of like 14.8E. So maybe the reason like McClintock and Alexander Reed were looked at for when it came to Hoffman's situation. Maybe Walker had already been killed at that point. We don't know though. It's never stated after Zeta what exactly happened to Walker, but those are your commanders. Now we get to the really heavy hitters. You do great as a commander, we're going to move you up again. This time, you are a lieutenant colonel. And not only that, you lead battalions now. A battalion holds 300 to 1,000 soldiers under your command. As the leader of these people, I mean, that's a lot of people in general. Even thinking about like towards the end of the COG, that's a lot. That's a lot. Like, there were like thousands of soldiers at the end instead of millions. Like, there were not a lot of COG left. But some characters we have that are lieutenant colonel status, we actually have two characters that are mentioned. One of them we have is James Amsden. So James Amsden was from the books. He was one of the people that was on board over during Marcus's trial. So he was the one that was kind of looking over and talking to Dom about everything involving the trial and how he was just like, you know, you're probably not going to get promoted after all this, but I respect you a lot, Dom. He was a lieutenant colonel, so he was holding it high. So this was towards like the middle of the Locust War, 10 AE, I believe. 10 AE. So he would have been, this would have been like the Locusts have already wiped out a lot of people. This person is most likely retired. So you had him, and then you had R.J. Lee Marcha. So R.J. Lee Marcha was the person who wrote Sam's letter. So the father Sam to his wife about, you know, baby Samantha, you know, her dad, when he died, he was the one that wrote the letter like, my apologies, we're sorry to hear, we're going to be giving him medals. He was the one who wrote that. So we don't have a lot of lieutenant colonels, but we do have some. Let's say you do amazing, or let's also say the Locusts have killed a lot of people that hold higher positions, and they're looking at you now to lead some more people. Well, they're probably going to promote you, and you're going to get the full-on colonel promotion. Here, you lead brigades. That's 1,500 to 3,200 soldiers under your call, ladies and gents. Now, we've mentioned him a lot, so we'll finally just say it here. Colonel Hoffman. Victor Hoffman is Colonel Hoffman. He is like the bona fide colonel we all know of. Aside from, you know, Colonel Sanders with his KFC, we know Colonel Hoffman. So Hoffman held this position for the longest time. He went through a lot of steps to get up to this ranking. He went through, he went through the Enlisted. He went through and got his training. He's the hero of Anvil Gate. We all know Hoffman. He went through everything. So Hoffman makes it to Colonel Hoffman. And here's where we have to talk about when it comes to ranking and everything, because of the fact that he is a colonel. Now, I'm looking at this right now. There are 1, 2, and 3 positions that are still higher than colonel that the COG has. Here's the thing. He's the one in charge of the actual COG military. He is the head of defense. That is his position. He is the one leading the entire COG. Now, it's not because there is only 3,200 soldiers left. There are more than that. Don't get me wrong. There's few, but not that few. It's the fact that everyone on top of him, within the time he is placed in charge, is essentially either missing or dead. The Locusts looked at cutting the heads off snakes. They got all the way down to one last colonel that was left. When we have Victor Hoffman, he fought along and he made it through the entire war. It was a hard-fought battle, but he made it to the very end. And he did actually... He was put into forced retirement, basically, as Colonel Hoffman. So he was placed out. He leads Scorpio now, unofficially Colonel Hoffman, just Hoffman now. But yeah, Hoffman, very big heavy hitter in the entire story. He held it really well. If I had to name the best colonel in this entire story, it's definitely going to be Hoffman. Let's touch on the other ones. When it came to the Onyx Guard side of things, Ezra Loomis was also a colonel. Now, he was the colonel of when it came to the Onyx Guard. Now, we don't know if he was the leader of the Onyx Guard. It's never stated that he ever held any form of position. As we know, Dury holds it over on Azura, but he's also a lower rank. My assumption is that by the time Dury was probably pulled over there, I have a good feeling that Loomis was already dead. I have a feeling that's probably the case. So he was all the way up in colonel status as an Onyx Guard, which is the highest rank we have ever seen for any form of Onyx Guard before. So as far as I'm aware, maybe if he was still alive by the end of the war, he might have been the one in charge over on Azura. But he does die holding off like the Locust and dying at Halvo Bay. He is the hero of Halvo Bay. Yeah, what can I say? Loomis, he was a character. He was a real character. He was the one that was about to court-martial and kill Kilo until he gave him a pardon because he saw how bad Karn was. Gotta give it to Loomis. Interesting character, to say the least. I have 3 other characters that did hold the rank of Colonel. Now, these are all from, like, during the Pendulum Wars era, so we're just kind of going to touch on them a little bit. So, over in the comics, we have James Choi. So, James was actually the leader of the 6th Brigade. The entire brigade was under his call. So, he was the 6th Brigade commander. It was Colonel Choi was the one in charge. Going over the books, we have Kimberly Anders. She was the Commando Training Director. So, the Commando Training, she was the leader leader of all of that. She was the director. And then we finally have Gail Barrington, who was the head of the recruiting for all of the COG, was Colonel Barrington. So these 3 characters, even though we don't get a lot of them and they are background characters, they still have huge positions that they fill in the COG. One's in charge of all the recruiting, the other one is the director of the commando training, and the other one's leading an entire brigade under his name. Again, Colonel, nothing to scoff at. One more time, we have to actually bend a few things to make all of this work, is that we have the Brigadier status. Again, we have some characters that have just Brigadier status and some that are Brigadier General. And when I looked over on how the building blocks go for that, again, it's different. So how the COG pseudo has it set up, unofficially I'm seeing here. Next up, we would have, if you do great as a colonel, like let's say that 6th Brigade commander, let's say Choi does an amazing job, he's promoted to a brigadier, we've got brigadier status. So here you would possibly lead a division. So the reason I say possibly is because we don't know brigadier, yay or nay. Definitely brigadier general, you probably do. But brigadier, you're leading probably a division. That's 10,000 to 16,000 soldiers under your call. So they're leading like a good chunk of the army is like under their call. This is what you get with the brigadiers. We only know of one character that held brigadier status, and that was from the comics, and it was only a mention from the comics even, and that was Brigadier Dudley. So Brigadier Dudley was pushing in his notes that he was handing off, he was pushing for the spec op units to pretty much like join the COG or like push spec ops in order to have like the Pence saying how they fight the spec op units or the commandos. They were trying to push for that to be a more prominent thing. So that was what he was trying to pitch to the COG in general, to have a more larger standing in the military. Jumping up that rank, we now get Brigadier General. So with Brigadier General, the only character stated to be a Brigadier General was Roland Phoenix. So with Roland, he was the grandfather to Adam Phoenix. So he is like generations up of the Phoenix family. He was holding a very high title. The Brigadier General, that's someone who just, again, much like a brigadier, you're commanding a portion of the army. Like that's under your call at that point. So yeah, the Phoenix family has always been in the military, and it just shows like the officer ranks have always been a thing. For instance, officer rank with Roland, I believe it was stated Adam's father might have been over in the officer ranks. It might have been stated he was. We know for a fact that Adam was. The only one that never was and stayed enlisted was always Marcus. He never went into the officer ranks. If you are the creme de la creme, you have moved up all the ranks, you are the best there is, best there was, best there ever will be. If you are everything except Bret Hart himself, you move up to the general status. You become general status of the COG army. Now, it is important to state that even though you are a general, that does not mean you are leading the entire army. There are multiple generals that can be around at a time, like we are about to see right now. So with a general, you're leading, they don't even give a real definition of what you're leading. You're just leading 20,000 to 40,000 men, period, if you're just holding that position. Now, if you're holding the leader of defense or the military, yes, you're going to hold the whole thing. But as a normal general, you're looking at 20,000 to 40,000 soldiers. When it comes down to the 4 we have listed here that we know the names of, we have Bardry Solomon. So Solomon was the head of the COG army at the end of the Pendulum Wars and start of the Locust. Now, he was the head of defense. He was the one in charge of the army. It was all under him. When everything was going to foobar with the Locust, 1 year into it, when the hammer strikes and everything were happening, a lot of officials either died or went missing. These people were just gone without a trace or anything. Solomon was one of them. Now, everyone thought that he was dead. Everyone thought that he was dead. Everybody. He was not dead. He was actually taken off to Azura, and he was there because they took their highest ranking officials and their scientists and the Onyx Guard to basically be there ready to fight off the Locust, or for something, for like a start of humanity, if they had to restart humanity, if they got Adam's machine to work and they had to start on Azura. So they brought him the head of defense, and basically his job was to have everyone rallied and ready. You had Dury, who was in charge of the Onyx Guard, but then you actually had Solomon, who was in charge of like everything. So that's basically how it felt. Like the one time I can say that the Onyx Guard had to listen to somebody was probably Solomon. He's like, I'm head of defense, I'm head of it all, you're listening to me right now. Like, Onyx Guard is probably going to listen to you at that point. So he was in charge until he left, and that's kind of where Hoffman was thrown into things, because again, a lot of these other high-ranking officials were dead or gone by that point. Next up, we also have Brode. So, Brode was from the comics. Brode was pushing to fight off the UIR in Kashgar. So, he was there and he was fighting them off. It is stated that he was not the head of defense at the time. He was just a general that was fighting. The actual general in charge we had was Kenneth Markham Amori. he held the position during the Kashgar invasion during like the 60-ish, around the 60s year, 62, 63, early 60s range of the war. That's where he was in charge. So I have a feeling after he either retired or died, that's where Solomon was put in charge. But originally it was under Kenneth. Kenneth was the head of defense as the general. The final character we have that is named to be general status, we have Jod Lombard. He was actually someone who was a general and he retired later on, and he was really trying to push that the Air Force not have that big of a focus in the COG forces and focus more on helicopters when it came to the Ravens. Now, later on we learned like the Ravens were very, very heavily looked into because he had a push, he was a general, and that's why you didn't see a lot of planes or anything at the time, because the COG was trying to focus more on their aviation side of things with helicopters. So those are the 4 generals that held the highest position they can have in the COG forces. And that is it. That is every single rank that the COG has, or at least by what they have named. Maybe I'm missing something, but they named off all of this, and I covered it all. Okay, again, not all the characters, because there are so many. Like, if I put a list down of all the book characters that got mentioned just by name, that'd be half of the list. So we did it. We're good. We made it to the end, and you're going to say, well, why aren't we mentioning chairmans or first ministers? Those are political seats of power. We're talking about the military, okay? We're not mentioning anything involving politics. We're talking about the military rankings of things, and we did it. It's done. I'm happy. You're happy. I'm certain that no one else on YouTube has made a video involving everyone's rank breakdown, so yippee skippy for me, I guess. But yeah, that'll do it. That's all the ranks going up from a cadet all the way to a general. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank everyone for making this possible. Thank the patrons for making things possible. I want to remind everybody, I currently now have a Discord. Discord now exists. It is in the link below. Go ahead and join in. A lot of talks when it comes to gear talks. All the channel Let's Plays will be going up there too. Final Fantasy is always kicking off, so I have that up there for anyone who wants to talk Final Fantasy. There's chat rooms. There's everything except a physical waiting lounge. I mean, we're working on that. We'll figure out somewhere to put it. But yes, thank you all for watching. I love you all to death. I will see you in the next video. Until next time. Later.